So we'll take a look at a few fundamental things first. Firstly, the Start Here menu that takes you to quick start tutorials and various other things. If you uncheck this Show on Startup menu, you can always go to Help and then open Start Here pane on Startup if you want that to show up again when Houdini first starts up. And now when you launch Houdini, that pane will pop up again. Now I prefer to have this unchecked so that I don't have to close that each time Houdini starts up. You might be familiar with this little button right here that says Maximize Pane. Well, you can also come in here, hover in this view and then press Ctrl and B, and that will maximize that pane. And the same goes for your network view. So that is Ctrl B to basically maximize that particular view or pane. With a node selected in the parameters view, you'll see that you have this Click for Help button, right? With that question mark. So if you click on that, it'll bring up this help system. And as you can see, merge geometry node. So that is very helpful when you first get started with Houdini. Ever seen that squid or pig head that Side Effects uses in their demonstrations? Well, what we can do is we can press tab, hovering over our scene view here. Press tab, just like you can in the network view, right? So just press tab, go down to test geometry, and as you can see you have the pig head, the rubber toy, shader ball, and the squib. So in this case I'll just select the pig head and I'll press enter to place that at the center of my world. And you have the squid as well. And of course you also have things for shading, such as the shader ball. It's very useful as well. We can toggle the wireframe. So first what we can do is we can press W. That will display the geometry as wireframe, right? We also have Shift W, which will toggle wireframe on shaded. Now of course you can also find many of these options in this drop-down list right here. We have a visualizer in Houdini which will color code our n-gons, triangles, and quads. Now this is one of my favorite interactive modeling features in Houdini. So you can right click on this visualization button. Now this is in this menu to the right here. Right click on that and you have the scene option. I'll add one by clicking add visualizer, clicking on that plus button, and then I'll select color. In the edit visualizer dialog, come down here to color type. It says attribute as is, and I'll click on that and I'll select polygon vertex count. Okay, so triangles will be this yellow color, quads, and then n-gons, which will be red. So I'll close out of this and you'll see that now shows up in here. You can turn this on and off and so on. As you can see, quads now show up in this blue color. Red is n-gons, and generally for modeling we want to kind of get rid of those, right? And of course we can do this using the modeling tools, using the poly split tool. Another tip for you, you can press Q and that will redo the last tool. So in this case again you see that drops down another poly split node. That again is the Q key, and as you can see those are now quads, so they change color. Okay, and now this is all quads, so they show up in this blue color. And you can turn those on and off clicking this button, or you can click this button right here that we talked about, right? That checker. So we can actually display the geometry information in our viewport, similar to what you might be familiar with if you are using Maya, for example. So we can do this by, again, going to this menu to the right of our 3D viewport here, right? And then scrolling all the way down, and we can click on this button to open the display options. And of course, you can just press D as well. D is the shortcut for this. And then in the guides section, we have this additional information section, and then this drop down, you can select always on, and then I'll close out of this. And now on my viewport, you'll see that this information shows up here. And if I go into edit mode, for example, select components, you'll see what is selected and everything else, right? As you might be familiar with other applications. So let's say you want to align one object to another. So for this demonstration, I have a torus object in my scene that I scaled up slightly, and I have this box object as well, and I basically scaled that top polygon in slightly to give it this kind of pyramid shape. So in this way we can identify what is the bottom and the top of kind of the shape that we want to place onto another object. So I'll select the box object, and with my move tool active, you'll see my handle appears at the center of that object. So I can actually move this handle. I'll right click on it. Now there are quite a few ways of doing this, but firstly I'll make sure my handle is aligned to my object, and I'll click this attach to geometry to basically detach these handles now from my object. So what I can do now is I can come in here and I can click on this point snapping, and now I'll snap this handle to one of those points. Okay, like so. And now I want to reattach. So I'll check this attach to geometry now, so that when I now move this handle, my object moves with it. So at this point you should take care not to click off of your object or anything like that, because you can of course change between, for example, the move tool and the rotation tool. That'll still work, okay? But you don't want to click off of this, because then you'll have to redo those steps to get this handle into position. So what I want to do now, and I chose this, so I chose this torus object for a reason here. And also another thing to note is that if you have flat shaded, for example, it'll be difficult to see your wireframe on these objects. So what I tend to select is flat wire shaded, and now I can see the wireframe on my object. What I'll do now is I'll change to primitive snapping. I'll right click on that and I'll click on primitive snapping options. So in this snap options dialog here, we have a few options. First, I'll check orient on snap, and then you can choose between nearest axis to normal or nearest axis to frame. So in this case, I'll select nearest axis to frame, and I'll close that off. And now when I move my object, you'll see it'll snap. Now it does not align the way we want, so what I can do is I can simply rotate my object slightly, okay, to get it more or less in position where I want that, because as a pyramid, of course, we want this to be the floor at the bottom right there. So I'll switch back to my move tool, and that should now snap. Now I'll go into this snap options again. You can change that to nearest axis to normal as well. And I'll show you in a second here what happens in this case. So I'll move this object around this pyramid, and you'll see it snaps fine. We can rotate this around, for example, various other things like that, and it snaps. But as you can see, In this case, for example, it does not rotate to align itself with the topology of this torus. So in this case, again, I'll go into the snap options, and currently I was in nearest axis to normal, right? So I'll change back to nearest axis to frame, one that we selected originally. Close that off. And now as I move my object along the surface of this torus, you'll see that it snaps and it aligns itself. And you can come in here and you can snap that to one of those points if you want to as well, and things like that. And you can see that that is now flat on that surface. Okay. And from here you can still go in and rotate it around, various other things like that. As you can see, this works rather well. The tools are not as intuitive as the snaps and precision tools in Modo, but they do work, and so I suggest you play around with them. We can reorder the node input connections. So let's say I have a merge node here, or any one of those nodes that takes kind of more than one input, right? And as you can see, those lines cross right here. So maybe I don't want that. You can just press Shift and R. And as you can see, it'll actually show you down here, Shift with R, reorder selected node inputs, right? So as you can see, those inputs change as I toggle that. Another thing you can do, I'll just delete this and zoom out. Let's say I want to add a node down here and have that be connected to one of these nodes. Of course, you can right click or press tab and search for that node. But as I now place that node down, it is not connected, right? When you press enter or you click on that node to place it. So what you can do instead, again, this is when you are zoomed out, because when you're zoomed in, you can right click on this output, not on the node itself, but right click on the output here and then type, say, merge, for example, and you'll see we get this preview now. You can left click to place that. But when we are zoomed out, it's not that easy. Like I said, if you come in here and you add that node and you simply press return or enter, you can place that, but it's not connected. So what you can do instead is press shift and enter. So I'll do that again. I'll select this node and I'll press tab and merge and shift and enter. And as I zoom in, you'll see this node is now connected. When you press the tab key to bring up the node list, you can hit the spacebar, and that will show all of the nodes that are available at once. You can scroll through here. Now the available nodes will change depending on the context that you are in. Now this actually goes off to my other screen, so there are quite a few nodes. I'll just press escape to close that. So again, that is pressing tab to bring up this list, and of course you can start typing in here, right, to put down a node, but instead press tab and then spacebar, and you'll see that shows this huge list. So in Houdini we work in these different contexts, and to make it easier for us we can split the panes either horizontally or vertically. So what I'll do is I'll press Alt and the opening square bracket, and you'll see that it'll split that pane vertically. We can also split it horizontally by pressing Alt and the closing square bracket, and you'll see that splits that horizontally like this. And now I'll just close this one off. You can close it off by clicking on that cross right there, just like you can, for example, in Google Chrome or something like that. And in this case, so I'll close those off. I'll split this pane vertically again. And now you can see that we can navigate in these panes independently, right? And you'll see this pin that says not following selection, and this basically means you can navigate around in these panes, as you can see. And this one to the right here does not change. You can copy a node by pressing and holding Alt and then left clicking and dragging on a node. So I'll go into this box object, for example, and let's say I want to copy this. Again, pressing and holding Alt, I'll left click and drag on that node to create a copy of it. Gathering multiple wires into a dot. So in this case, you can see that these transform nodes share the same input basically, and that is this box. So in this case here, we can actually bundle up all of these wires to organize our network view here if you want to do that. And we can do that by pressing and holding Alt, and then I'll left click and drag, and you'll see that creates this dot node, right? So I'll just delete that again. So again, pressing and holding Alt, left click and drag, and now as I move, you'll see that we'll pick up the other wires. And this is a new feature of Houdini 16, where they revamped the node network. A few more improvements to the node network in Houdini 16 allows us to, well, firstly, we can cut our wires pressing and holding the Y key. You'll see that the cursor changes to the scissor, and if I left click and drag, I can now cut across my wires, right? So let's try that again. You can of course just cut one or two of those, or you can cut all of them at the same time. Pressing and holding Y, left click and drag and cut across to sever those wires. Now another quick tip is you can also select multiple nodes like this, and then left click and drag on one of those outputs and to the input of the node that you want to connect those with, and you'll see that those will wire up all of those nodes at the same time instead of having to go and do each one of those individually. And I'll cut those again just for fun. Let's say you've made a real mess of your network view. Now you can line up each node. You'll see that it'll kind of pre-highlight, and it'll stick and snap basically into place like that. A quicker way is to press and hold the A key, and then I'll hover over this node, right? Press and hold A, and then left click and drag upwards, and you'll see that will align those nodes. You can actually press Ctrl Z to undo that. Or this one, I can press and hold A again, left click and drag downwards, right? You can also press and hold A and left click and drag left or right. Get various effects like that. So that's a quick way of aligning all of your nodes in your network. That's it for this episode. I hope you find these tips and tricks useful. See you next time.